Good evening, listeners. You're tuned into Ghostly Broadcast, Paranormal Station. I am your host, Timothy. We journey to Wyoming tonight, a place where the spirit of the old frontiersmen never really died. But with settlement comes bloodshed, hardship, and toil. Despite its stunning natural beauty, the cowboy state is littered with scars of the past. Our first testimony of the evening comes from Olivia at Glendo State Park. Dear Timothy, I'm Olivia. I lost my husband, Gregg, last year on a cross-country road trip. We'd retired early and planned on doing some sightseeing in a rented RV. We'd stopped in Glendo State Park by the reservoir to spend the night and hike in the morning. It was supposed to be a beautiful, picturesque place, but when we arrived, there was a lot of fog rolling in from the river. It's okay. We can spend the night in the RV, and the fog should clear in the morning, Gregg chirped as he put the chocks under the wheels. As the sun faded behind the clouds, covering the lake and the mist in a hue of blue twilight, I stared out over the reservoir, finishing a glass of wine. Gregg had turned in, claiming he was tired, but I wanted to sit and enjoy some peace by the water. A cold, stiff breeze blew and made me shiver. As it did, I saw a cloud of fog barrel over the water towards me. Closer it got, the more it moved and shaped into something tangible and solid. I stood up to get a better look. I saw an old wooden ship sailing slowly on the unmoving lake surface when it approached. Its mast, sails, and hull were covered with frost and snow. The ship banked, showing its broadside to me on the shore. The crew stood, amassed around something, looking at me from the deck. Their faces and beards were pale, covered in frost. I raised my head to glimpse what they were standing around and gasped when I recognized it. Laid out on canvas was the body of my husband, Gregg, cold, pale, and covered in frost. My wine glass slipped from my hand, tumbling into the sand. I held my hands to my mouth in shock. I trembled against the cold and horror of what I was witnessing. The ship turned to sail away. It became wrapped in the fog as it did, and appeared to melt away into a formless cloud, disappearing from the lake and into the night. "Gregg!" I yelled, turning back to the RV. I dashed inside to check on him. At first, I was relieved to see that he was awake, sitting in bed, but his arm was clutched around his chest, and he struggled to breathe. "Gregg, what's wrong?" I asked. "I don't know," he gasped. "I think you should call 911. I didn't want to wait, so I frantically took the chocks from the wheels, started the engine, and drove the RV to the nearest hospital. By the time I got us both there, Gregg wasn't talking. The doctors and nurses did their best, but my poor husband died in the ER of an apparent heart attack. I had to stay a few days in a nearby motel while I made arrangements to get his body home for the funeral. Our son flew out to be with me and drive the RV home, so I didn't have to. After explaining what happened, I let slip about the ship I'd seen right before Gregg died. "That's crazy, Mom," Dylan, our son, said. I would have agreed with him if it hadn't been for the motel manager who had overheard me. "Far be it from me to interject, ma'am," he said. "I understand you've been through a lot, but you're not crazy. Ship you saw sounds like the death ship of the Platte River. It's an omen of death. It shows you your loved ones the day they're supposed to die." "And what if I hadn't seen it?" I asked. "Would he still be alive?" "That's between you and God, ma'am," he said. "Thank you for listening, Timothy." Olivia. Thank you for your testimony, Olivia. Omens, messages, and prophecies exist in some form or another, where the spirit world gives us a glimpse into the inner workings of the universe around us. It may not give us the news we want, but it isn't evil or intentionally harmful. Our next testimony comes from Wesley at the Devil's Tower National Monument. Dear Timothy, my name is Wesley, and I was an avid rock climber for most of my life. I've climbed routes all over the U.S., but I've hung up my harness since I lost my climbing partner. I mostly blame myself for what happened, despite the reports claiming it to be a tragic accident. We'd managed to get some time off work for a long weekend for my birthday in June, and I'd always wanted to climb Devil's Tower. John, my friend and climbing partner, bought us the plane tickets to Wyoming and paid for the stay in the lodge. By the first morning, we were up early and ready to climb. As we approached the tower, several Native Americans gathered around the park. One of them approached us as he saw us unpacking our climbing gear. "Are you two planning on climbing today?" he politely asked. "Yeah," I said with a smile. "Well, respectfully, we'd ask that you don't climb today. This monument is sacred to us, especially in June during our ceremonies," he calmly explained. Before I could respond, John stepped in front of me. "We have every right to climb it. It's on federal land. Just like you have the right to have your ceremonies," he aggressively stated, almost as if he'd been prepared for this. "John," I interjected. "It's desecration," the native man pleaded. "John, I didn't know." "It's okay, we can always come back," I implored. "I didn't want to be disrespectful." "No. I paid for this trip. We'll be up and down in no time. I'm not missing this chance that we've come all this way for," he huffed before grabbing his gear, tossing it over his shoulder and marching down the trail. I looked at the native man and the crowd of onlookers behind him. I couldn't leave John to climb on his own, but every fiber of my being felt their eyes piercing me. "Wes, are you coming?" John shouted, and I begrudgingly followed him. All enjoyment and excitement I'd felt about the climb had vanished. I meekly let John take the lead, and I followed on. I didn't look down, but could feel the crowd's eyes on us both, burning into my back. There was no one else climbing that day. Just me and John. As John approached the summit, he looked back down with a big beaming smile. "You gotta see this, Wes," he chuckled. I saw something emerge from the top of the rock behind him. I shuffled my position to get a better look and saw the largest bear I'd ever seen. Bigger than I ever thought possible. "John!" I screamed. John turned to see it right as the huge, snarling creature swiped at him. A claw as big as an SUV ripped across John, his harness and the rope I was belaying him with. He didn't even make a sound. He tumbled down the rock face, shattering his body on the crags as he fell. I frantically clambered back down to his aid, but when I reached him there was already a crowd around him, along with the park rangers and EMTs. I couldn't even get my words out before they all determined what had happened. John fell, and that was that. No one believed me, or maybe they just chose to accept the official story over what I'd seen. I still harbor so much guilt about his death. If we'd have just turned and left, would he have lived? Yours, Wesley. Thank you for your testimony, Wesley. There are places humans have held sacred all over this good earth. Some have been that way since time immemorial. Often, the wisest choice is to heed the warnings of those who understand such significance. Our next testimony comes from Hannah, who stayed at the historic Occidental Hotel. Dear Timothy, my name is Hannah, and I want to tell you about my brush with ghosts. I'd never believed in spirits or hauntings before, but if you can't believe your own eyes, then what can you believe? I was traveling alone after splitting up with my fiancée. I needed to be alone for a while and take some time to be okay with being single again. A road trip to some cool sights seemed like a good idea. I arrived at the Occidental Hotel and checked in. The receptionist smiled and offered me a pamphlet of tourist attractions and places to eat. You know, we've got a ghost tour happening tomorrow if you're interested, he informed. No thanks. That's not really my thing, I shrugged. I found my room, freshened up and relaxed a bit before dinner. On my way out, walking down the corridor to the stairs, I felt something tap against my heel. I stopped and turned to see what it was. It was a little wooden ball. I heard a little girl's voice when I stooped down to pick it up. "Will you play with me?" she asked. I saw a little girl with long dark hair and a small white dress. I furrowed my brow at her, but she pleaded at me with puppy dog eyes, and I relented. "Sure," I said with a smile. The two of us knelt down and passed the ball between us, rolling it along the floor. "Where are your parents?" I asked. "My mama is one of the working girls. She's upstairs," she said matter-of-factly. That caught me off guard. It was a weird way to describe her mom being one of the housekeeping staff, but I shrugged it off. "Come on," she said, excitedly producing more wooden balls from her dress pocket. "Let's see how far we can bowl them." I played with her for a bit longer, bowling down the corridor before my stomach grumbled, as I was getting pretty hungry. At first I tried to hide it, but after a while she heard it. "Are you hungry?" she asked. "Yeah, I was actually just about to head out for some dinner before you asked me to play with you," I explained. "It's okay. You can go and eat, and maybe we can play again later," she asked, beaming at me with a big grin. I noticed a few missing teeth. She looked a little bit old to be losing her milk teeth, but I figured she was just a late bloomer. "I'd like that," I said, smiling back at her. She grabbed me by the hand before I turned away to walk off. Her fingers were icy cold, and I felt the chill run up my arm into my chest. "I'm sorry you lost your little girl," she whispered before giving me a hug. Then, just like that, she ran down the corridor, and I never saw her again. For a second, I stood there frozen on the spot, trying to figure out what she was talking about. Eventually, I headed out to find somewhere to eat, but my mind was stuck on her words. As I passed the front desk, the receptionist said hello and asked if I was heading out for dinner. I said yes, paused, and approached him. "Whose little girl is that? The one with the long dark hair?" I asked. His face dropped while he figured out what to say. "Was she wearing a little white dress?" he asked. "Yeah." "I think you might have seen Emily," he explained. "What? What do you mean?" I asked. "Emily was the daughter of a prostitute who worked here back in the day. I'm talking way back in the Old West 1800s. She died of cholera," he told me. I frowned and thought for a second, trying to understand everything. I need a minute," I said, leaving the hotel and looking for somewhere to eat. Her words rang around my head over and over again. "Sorry you lost your little girl. You see, Timothy, the reason me and my fiancée broke up was due to my miscarriage. At first, I thought he was excited to be a father, but it was only after that I realized he'd only proposed because I'd fallen pregnant. His relief was palpable when he learned I wasn't, but it hurt so much that I couldn't be with him anymore. He only cared that his life wouldn't be upended, not that his partner was heartbroken. That Emily girl knew all about it, Timothy. She came to comfort me when I needed it. That poor, sweet thing. I don't know how the spirit world works, but I hope she can move on to whatever peaceful afterlife awaits us. She deserves it. Yours, Hannah. Thank you for your honest testimony, Hannah. While we often associate ghosts as malevolent forces that refuse to leave our mortal plane, not all of them are so. Some retain childlike innocence even after their tragic ends. That concludes this evening's broadcast. If you enjoyed this session of the ghostly broadcast, Paranormal Station, consider a like, subscribe, and tap the bell icon to be notified when all our broadcasts go live. If you have a testimony of your own encounter with that paranormal, get in touch in the comments and you could be featured in our next broadcast. Stay safe and tread lightly, dear listeners. Have a good evening.